Welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest today, Dr. Jan Hasbrouck. As I'm sure most of you know, Jan is a very well known, respected expert in education, especially reading education. She's published books, managed many research studies, been a professor at universities, created assessments, oral reading fluency norms. I mean, the list just keeps going on. And today we are so lucky to have Jan talk with us about her phonics assessment and her quick phonics screener. Jan, thank you so much for being here. I have already learned so much from you over the many years, and I look forward to learning even more today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. It's lovely to be here to talk about the quick phonics screener. And the reason I'm doing that here with my friends at Read Naturally, as you may know, or you're going to learn, Read Naturally is the publisher of this quick phonics screener. So I'm really happy to take a few minutes to walk you all through what this screener is, why it was created. My partnership with Read Naturally and this relatively new fourth edition of the Quick Phonics Screener. So we'll get started. So for our time today, wanted to talk just a little bit. I mean, you're here probably because you already understand why a phonics assessment is important, but I want to ground us in that. We didn't just create this screener for no reason. There's a very important reason. And then a walk through the history. The Quick Phonics Screener, some version of it has been around for a very long time. So bring you up to date with the fourth edition. And then what does it do? What do if you administer this assessment with your students? How does it help you as an educator? How does it help your students? So, why is phonics important? So, first, like, what is phonics? I think people sometimes misunderstand that as just knowing what letters say, but it we want to take it further than that. That is essentially what it is. Phonics is that relationship between the symbols that we use to represent sounds and the English language and many other languages we use letters. And the whole purpose of that is meaning. It's to connect print to meaning, to comprehension, to language. And there has been for many decades now a growing body of research evidence that we're using the quick terminology these days of science of reading in SOR. And across the many decades where people have been studying what phonics are and how the role they play in teaching children to read. It is one of the areas within science of reading where we have strong agreement that we've really proven this. Some people call this settled science. And this is maybe one of the areas within reading instruction where we can say it's settled science. We know that teaching phonics is essential for skillful reading. And I would assume most people listening to this have seen Scarborough's brilliant infographic, often referred to as Scarborough's rope, where she talks about the major components necessary for skillful reading. And of course, she includes phonics. She uses the terms alphabetic principle, that understanding that the letters represent sounds, and that spelling sound correspondences. That's how she refers to it on her rope. So we know we do this because teaching phonics is related to all the really important components. We teach phonics so students can read words. Words are necessary for students to read passages fluently so that they can comprehend and understand them. Phonics is necessary for spelling and writing. So we got to get this right. So that's really important. It's one of the key foundational skills. So that's the importance, and I think most of you probably knew that in the beginning. But what about assessing phonics? Why is that important? Well, another growing aspect of the science of reading is the value of data informed instruction. I think some of us might logically draw that conclusion, but evidence is mounting to say that when teachers do use assessment results to tailor their so this is what it is, teachers using assessment results to tailor, differentiate their instruction to specific identified needs. But what the research says is that it more skillfully, more effectively moves instruction from just our professional sense, our belief, our intuition about where a student is, to more effective evidence-based practices. And the research confirms that when teachers are using data-informed instruction, uh, our students do better. So that's really important. However, whenever I talk about assessment, I also want to remind us that the whole purpose of assessment is instruction. Instruction is the entire purpose. And I think every educator absolutely believes the actual fact that there is never enough time for us to do our work. Time is always limited. So we have to be really, really careful about taking any of that limited precious time away from instruction for assessment. So, with that in mind, when I'm thinking about assessment, I always want to be sure that assessments provide useful information. And what makes information useful is that I can use it right away to plan good instruction. So, that's what I want. And I also always want assessments that are as efficient or quick as possible. So, really purposeful, give me good information as quickly as possible. That's what I need because I believe as a professional that I should inform my instruction with data, but it's got to be useful information and it's got to be collected quickly. So, then how do we assess phonics? Well, there are multiple ways to do that. What I landed on a long time ago, as you're going to hear, is versions of this thing that I started calling from the beginning the quick phonics screener. So, I wanted something that would assess my students' phonics skills, partly because of the way I was trained. I studied to be an elementary teacher back in the early 70s, and I was very lucky to study at the University of Oregon. I connected with Zig Engelman. Some of you may know his name. He invented what we now call direct instruction, explicit instruction. So that's what I learned from the beginning. And Zig, even when I was, just getting started as a teacher, Zig said we need to collect data to inform our instruction. So after I graduated and went out into the world, I ended up working as an elementary reading specialist. And of course, I was working with elementary children who were struggling with learning to read. And so, of course, I focused on making sure that they learned phonics, that they acquired that alphabetic principle. I wanted data to let me know, as quickly and accurately as possible what did my students know? Which of them knew these phonics and which needed more? So I ended up creating a very, very early, version of what we now call the quick phonics screener, based on other assessments that I took a look at. I was given access to phonics assessments that were very, very long. It didn't seem purposeful to me to spend so much time administering these assessments. And when I, wanted to buy one of them, they were super expensive. So the original purpose of the quick phonics screener was all for me in my own classroom. I just created an assessment that was one-on-one because I just want to know what each students knew. What I created was a diagnostic assessment. The whole purpose was to give me information so I could appropriately, correctly target each student's instruction or intervention. So nowadays, I emphasizing that word diagnostic here because nowadays, remember this was many, many decades ago. Nowadays, we're much more sophisticated in how we think about assessments. We categorize assessments as screening assessments, diagnostic assessments, progress monitoring assessment, outcome-based assessments. Our language around assessments has evolved and become more um, accurate and precise. So I knew what I wanted to do was diagnosis, but because it was quick, I thought that's what screener meant. I thought screener meant a quick assessment. Now we know it means something different. A screener is something we administer to all students for benchmarking purposes. So some people ask, why was this not called why is it called the quick phonics screener when it's not a screener? We just kept the name because it got branded that way, but I understand it's a diagnostic assessment, and I want you to understand it's a diagnostic assessment. And from the beginning, it was designed to efficiently, quickly provide a snapshot of each student's strengths, what did they know, and what were their needs, what were they needing to learn in phonics and decoding. So we call it a phonics screener, phonics diagnostic, but phonics by themselves is not what the important thing is, as we talked about. It's learning phonics so you can read words, and then reading words so reading can become more fluent, so comprehension. And we watch phonics develop over time. We see, okay, you're getting there. You've learned some of these things. You're fairly accurate, but you're not yet fully automatic. So we look at students who are developing skills or they have fully mastered the skills. It was never intended, the version that I first used was not intended to provide a grade, or determine a grade level performance. And I will say that's maybe one of the most common frequent questions I get from people who are using the QPS. They say, how should I interpret these results to give my students a grade, an A or B or C or a pass or a fail? How do I know if my fourth grader who's in intervention, what grade level they're performing on? That's not the purpose of the QPS. So I don't give any guidelines for that. If you need to use it to give a grade because of the system in which you work, you're going to have to figure that one out yourself because that's not the purpose, and I have no real guidance for you for how to do that. So it did evolve over time, that little, use I think it did not have a name when I was first using it in my classroom. I just made this phonics screener for my own purpose. But things evolve if you, are working in the world of evidence-based, information, because we know that this science of reading, this is the Reading League's definition of it, the science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. And I think that's a very good definition, but I've added a few words to it because what we know about science is that it's always unfinished. It's always continuously growing and evolving. So I took it upon myself to expand the Reading League definition a little bit. So how it evolved is, I left the classroom, got my doctorate, and ended up working in, the Department of Educational Psychology at Texas A&M University, and I was there, for all of the 1990s, and during that time, the state of Texas, had, a statewide reading initiative, became a really, really big thing in the state of Texas, and they developed some reading academies to train teachers across the state. And someone had seen, or maybe I offered, I don't recall, a copy of my little classroom assessment, and they really liked it and wanted to use it within the Texas Reading Academy. So I licensed it from Texas A&M to the Texas Education Association to use a very, very early version of the Quick Phonics Screener. It was, a single form, and that is one of the things I wanted to say, that you can still see versions of this all over the internet. They should not be there. I do see all the time people saying, "Oh, I like to use the Quick Phonics Screener because it's free, and here's a copy of it." And that's just teachers caring about each other and wanting to be helpful and sharing things that they have. But you can see across the bottom, it says copyright, and it's not supposed to be shared. And that older version has been improved so much that whenever we see that on the internet, we try to contact people and say that should no longer be shared. I was very, very grateful to Read Naturally, who in 2006 suggested that they partner and become the publisher of the Quick Phonics Screener. And so 2006 was the first edition. And of course, they made tremendous, tremendous improvements in my little one page assessment. They added a very important thing, a examiner's manual. Here's the directions. It never came with directions because I created it for myself. I knew what I wanted to do. So they worked really hard with me to get directions written on paper, and then a separate booklet to use with students for administration. Another really important improvement was multiple forms to allow progress monitoring. So we created an A, B, and C form to use across the year. And those do not need to be used in that order. If you're using the Quick Phonics Screener, you could start with a B and then C and then A. It's just there for your options. Uh, Pilot testing by folks at Read Naturally found that some of the, tasks, what we later called skill sets, were not exactly in the right order. We wanted them to be, hierarchical, to move in a systematic way from letter names to letter sounds to simple CBC words, etcetera, and some of the more advanced tasks, it seems, some were a little earlier and needed to be moved up. So 5 years later, we were ready to, do a second edition, so my partnership with Read Naturally continued, and we found that some of the advanced skill sets were actually assessing multiple skills, and it would give us more information if we separated them out, and so we expanded from 10 to 13. A 3rd edition in 2017 was really phenomenal. One of the users of QPS, Stephanie Biberly, contacted us and said that she was using the Quick Phonics Screener as a spelling screener, and we thought that would be lovely to add that more formally. So I worked with Stephanie and added that wonderful, really, really smart addition to the Quick Phonics Screener. And now, just at the end of last year, I partnered again with my friends at Read Naturally, the wonderful team there. And the changes in this 4th edition, some of the student-facing materials changed a little bit. You'll see there's a slightly larger font, but the biggest change that, it was implied all along, but we formally added timing to, this assessment with some estimated guidelines. We don't have norms for the timing, but some guidelines. If they're in this range, consider it this, and if they're in this range, consider it this way. The timing was always implied from the very beginning. In my own classroom, I would take note of the fact of this student got them all right, but she took a long time to do it. She was slow. Here's another student that got them all right, but knew each one instantaneously. And for me, that was enough. I could categorize students that way. But I found that when I was using Quick Phonics Screener, when I was out in schools, volunteering, working with schools, I found that timing, because they were not my students, I wanted to communicate with the teachers. Actually, writing down the time was very helpful in interpretation. And in my mind, what I'm thinking, is, I interpret it this way. If students are reasonably accurate, but not automatic, we would call that developing. Their skill is good because it's moving, it's accurate, it's developing, but what we want to move every student to is toward mastery, that automatic response. And that thinking is grounded in work that you may be familiar with. It's been around for a long time. Researchers at the University of Washington created this instructional hierarchy where we know that for any skill, it has to start with the acquisition stage where we build accuracy. Then we take that accuracy, we build on that foundation and increase the rate of performance, building the fluency of the performance. And this is for any skill at all, but certainly for phonics and for word reading. And it's those first 2 steps in, Herring and Eaton's instructional hierarchy that are relevant to phonics: acquisition first, and then building fluency. The new manual continues with some detailed scoring guidelines. So when you open the instructional manual, you'll see things like this that give you a script to read or suggested words for use with the student. I'm going to ask you to read some words and sentences to me on this task 5 so I can learn which kinds of words are easy for you and which kinds of words you still need to learn. We try to keep this really low key, and you'll see at the bottom there, it talks about a timer. This is not about speed. I'll just start my timer when I hear your voice. We're not going to say ready, go. Um, and really detailed guidelines continue about how to use the assessment book with the student and how to encourage their best performance. And it moves from the tasks move from word reading, to sentence reading because we want to see how they apply phonics skills, decoding skills in non-real words, nonsense words, because that gives us the truest understanding of that decoding skill. But then we also want to see how students read that word type within meaningful text. And those two different performances can give a lot of good information. So that wonderful examiner's manual that has been included with Read Naturally's version of the Quick Phonics Screener detailed procedures for administering and scoring. I have heard from a lot of teachers that they find it very beneficial to start with the quick spelling screener because that's group administered. You give that to all of your students, and then that will tell you, that gives you a lot of information about which students are doing really well with their phonics. They can turn them into spelling, which is a harder task than decoding. And then that leaves you with far fewer students, in most cases, that you would want to take the time to do the individual QPS assessment. The manual also provides detailed procedures for interpreting the results. It gives you guidance from where to start in the assessment, when to stop, or whether to proceed on to the next skill set or even skip a set. There are some forms that Read Naturally created that gives you a chance to view the scores across a school year if you're using it for progress monitoring. There's a planning sheet so that you can look at your students' results and perhaps consider creating groups that would be for your instruction, your phonics instruction. And in the back, there are some really helpful scenarios. I think there's 3 different scenarios for the QPS and 7, excuse me, for the QPS and 3 for the quick spelling screener. So you can read those and get a little richer interpretation of what the administration and interpretation look like. So I hope that was a helpful overview for you for this new 4th edition, the Quick Phonics Screener that is a diagnostic assessment, and the Quick Spelling Screener. And now we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Jan. No surprise, I learned a bunch again from you, so thank you for that. I do have just a couple questions, and of course, the first one that came through is what you would expect, and you know, clearly have so much experience and knowledge with teachers because you brought up time over and over again, and that is almost always the biggest barrier and issue. And so, this question came in pretty quickly, which is how long does it take to administer the assessment?
Yep, that's the question, and
Mhm.
it's the excellent question. That's why the first word in the name is quick. It's supposed to be as quick as possible. And and you, the teacher, controls how much time you spend on it. So very rarely, I have never given the quick phonics screener from the first skill set all the way through. First of all, you don't go all the way through. No student would be needing to be assessed in letter names and letter sounds and also able to read four-syllable words. So, we don't do that. We keep it as quick as possible by starting where you need information about your students. Do you need to know whether the students know their letter names and letter sounds? Well, that's where you would start. That would be an appropriate logical start in kindergarten and for some first graders and maybe some older students who are really significantly behind. But you can start wherever you think the students uh, I like to actually start where I think they can do pretty well,
Mhm.
so that they get warmed up a little bit, and then we hit the harder things. And the scoring manual will give you guidance for where to stop. When students are making, they cannot successfully read more than half of the words, that's a good place to start. You could stop. You could stop earlier if you want to. You can also this is an informal assessment. You can, if you find, "Oh, this student is doing a lot and this assessment's going longer than I thought," you can stop the assessment and do it again, pick it up again in the afternoon or the next day. So, the time is a lot under your control. It should be administering only those assessments that give you information, although, as I said, I start a little early, where I think skill students will be somewhat skillful, but if they blow it out of the water, they're really, really good, the scoring manual will say, "Skip the next one." And if the next one they fail badly, you can always go back. I mean, it's really informal and iterative, but in general, we would not want to spend more than 10 minutes, 15 minutes, administering this assessment.
Excellent. And one thing I hear from customers who use it is not only can it be done quickly, but one of the things that I've heard is really helpful is because the scripts are so complete that
Mhm.
you are able to quickly know how to use it.
Yes,
Sometimes it's overwhelming to get started with it.
yes.
And so that flexibility that you brought up is fabulous. And then the ability to get it going right away. It also helps with the speed of implementing that. Excellent. I've just got one more question, and of course, teacher is ever practical, and that is, what then what? Now you know where your kids have holes. Obviously, the ones that are doing this are likely to be kind of intervention kids who need a supplemental intervention type situation. Do you have anything you recommend for filling those holes, for solving the
Yeah.
problem?
That is oh, brilliant educators out there. That is always the gotta be the second how long does this thing take? And then what do I do with it? And what do you do with it is you, zoom in and make sure that the students are learning those all important foundational phonics skills so that
Mhm.
they can accurately read and spell words, with automaticity, with fluency, and understand what those words mean. So that would indicate to us, a phonics intervention. Uh, these days, I think a lot of the core programs that teachers are using are getting better and better at doing that. So for some of your students, it may be just, they're making the progress that they should make in their core program
Mhm.
and just stick with that and, maybe do a little tier 2 extra work using your core materials. But I have spent my 5 decades in this field, working with students who needed more. They needed intervention, and that need of mine for my own students is what connected me with Read Naturally all those decades ago with their because I was fascinated by the very, very first product that Read Naturally created, a fluency intervention now called Read Live, which has over the decades just gotten better and better and better. But the other thing that Read Naturally continues to do is develop other materials, and all of them um, are at that same quality of value, efficiency, effectiveness with students. So, in the phonics, when I'm looking for a phonics intervention, I'm gonna go right to Read Naturally and look at the fabulous, product of word warm-ups that do a targeted just what I was looking at for my own students back in the day, letters and words and text. You want all of that. So, yeah, that's one of I can with, no hesitation, highly recommend people who are looking for a fluency or a phonics intervention or instruction. I mean, you may be using a program that has is kind of weak in that area. Yeah, word
Yeah,
warm-ups.
yeah, that's great, and Jen, I think you hit on it with those core programs have gotten so much better at that.
Yeah,
And there are hopefully most of your kids, that's going to be all they need.
yeah.
And then you've got
Mhm.
these ones that need even more. And Word
Exactly.
Warm-Ups comes in a paper version with audio CDs, and it also comes as part of Read Live. It's Word Warm-Ups Live is one of the programs you get in there. And as you said, starting with letter sounds, going all the way through those multisyllabic words. So um, thank you. Thank you for all of your time and your knowledge. We really appreciate having you and um, getting to learn a little bit from your vast knowledge base. So we appreciate your time and hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Jen.